Okay, we're going to make the spaghetti sine curve. Thanks for checking out this video. So what you see here is actually what was page 2 of your packet. And the very first thing I need you guys to do, and I can't zoom this out any further to show you, so I'll have to scroll it through here. I need you to separate pages 2, 3, and 4, and I need you to tape them together. So I need you to tape them together in a specific way. This is page 2. I think that circle might be familiar to you guys. It should be at the very left-hand side of your paper. And then if I reach the end of page 2, page 3 I taped and put right in line to create, essentially what we're making is a big axis, a big graph, X and Y axes. So I taped, this is the beginning of your third page, which has the origin right after it. And I need you to try and tape it on there so that it lines up with the previous page. If you see right there, I'll zoom in a little bit. It didn't come out really nicely. That's negative pi over 6, and I didn't do a great job of taping there. So we didn't line up great, but that's okay. Try and make them line up the best that you can. You're not going to be perfect. Okay? So here's page 3, and then even at the end of page 3, I need to do the same thing for page 4. Pages 3 and 4, there's a little bit of white space that you might want to cut off the top, or I guess it would be the bottom actually, to try to make the thing tape on well. Okay? If you have questions about how this works, if you want to, definitely ask me, okay? And if you mess it up, let me know. I can get you another copy. Okay? But that's what needs to happen first. So you need to have this big, long, 3-sheet wide piece of paper. Let me zoom in for a second on the circle on the paper. I think that's going to look a little bit familiar to you guys, or I hope so at least. Yeah, that's basically a copy of the unit circle. And I want to remind you of a couple of definitions. We said that on that unit circle, that the sine of each angle was the y coordinate. So for example, the sine of pi over 6 would be this length. I'll lightly draw it on here. You don't need to draw it on yours. This length right here would be the sine of pi over 6, because that's the distance from the axis to the y coordinate of that point. Similarly, and it won't show up too well because I'm drawing it on the axis, but the cosine of pi over 6 is this length here, because that's the length it would take you to get from here to that angle. You could also find that length up here. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a graph of either the function y equals sine of x or y equals cosine of x. And I need you to decide right now. You can even pause the video for a few seconds. Decide which one you're going to make right now. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. And I apologize, I don't have the spaghetti to show you today. I'm going to have to do it with string. And I'm sorry about that. Okay, check that. Good news, I actually found my spaghetti. So for a second, I'm going to pretend you're doing the sine curve. Here's what I want you to do. We're going to start with pi over 6. It's the first angle on our unit circle, and we're going to make a trip all the way around and then some. So at pi over 6, I'm going to decide that the sine of pi over 6 must be this length. Do you see that? From the point to the x-axis. And the best I can, I'm going to try and break off that piece of spaghetti at that length. And it's okay if you're not exactly there, but it should be pretty close. Okay, the spaghetti breaks pretty easily. Part of the reason I suggested you not use the angel hair or the thin spaghetti is that it breaks too easy. Okay? Now that length is the value of sine of pi over 6. So on the graph, if you move your paper to the right, what I want to do is I want to find the value of pi over 6 right there. And since we're making a graph of y equals sine of pi over 6, I want to set it up vertically so that at the end of that piece, I could draw a point in a minute, and that height is sine of pi over 6. So what I want you to do with the glue or the glue stick is to glue, or you can even use tape if you want to, tape that piece of spaghetti on right at pi over 6. Okay? I'm not going to glue it right now. Then you'll go back and you'll say, okay, now I got to do pi over 4. Well, pi over 4 on the unit circle, well, it's right there. And if I need to know what length sine of pi over 4 is, I'll set up my spaghetti here, and I will break off this length, hopefully. Pretty close. Okay. Try and do better than I did, okay? But then I'm going to move over, and I'm going to glue, I lost my sine of pi over 6. Let's pretend I glued that on real quick. And I'm going to glue on my pi over 4. Oh, you can't see it. Sorry. So pi over 6, now I'll glue on my pi over 4 here. And I'll do the same thing for pi over 3 and pi over 2. When I get over in quadrant 3, like for example, if I were going to do 7 pi over 6, which you will eventually do, I would need to put my spaghetti from the axis down to the point, like so. Like so. It's wanting to roll a little bit. So when I go to put that on the graph at 7 pi over 6, right there, I would need to put it below the graph. You're literally going to translate that piece over to the correct angle. And you're going to do that until you get all of these angles filled. Now I want to point out that this graph goes beyond 2 pi. So for example, 13 pi over 6, but you should be able to find that, I think. Okay? So that's if you're making the sine curve. Even point out that there are also some negative angles on there. So you need to go in the negative direction as well. And if you're struggling finding those angles, definitely let me know. We'll try and help you out. Okay? The one difference if you're making the cosine curve, I'll do a couple of the cosine ones with you. Suppose I'm doing cosine and I want to start with pi over 6. So at pi over 6, I need not the vertical distance, but the horizontal distance. Because the cosine of an input is the x-coordinate. So I'll try to get that length. Best strategy I've found is to maybe hold it in place at that point and then pick up the rest of the spaghetti. So try and hold it in place at that length and then pick up the other spaghetti. Now that's the length of cosine of pi over 6. But still when I get out to the graph on pi over 6, right here, if I'm making the cosine curve, I want to glue it on vertically. Because the graph we're making is going to have the cosine values as the y-coordinates. That's a little confusing. So if you're making the cosine curve, you need to set up your spaghetti horizontally on the circle. Okay, but you still need to put it on up or down on the graph. And just like before, if you were doing a value for the cosine where it should be negative, like at 5 pi over 6, for example, so you need to go from here negative in the x direction to 5 pi over 6. So since you get a negative value, when you go to 5 pi over 6, you need to put that below the axis. What I want you to do is after you get every piece of spaghetti glued on, some of the values might be 0, like I think cosine of pi over 2 is 0. You can just choose to leave no spaghetti there. Okay? But what I want you to do then there is to connect all the endpoints of your spaghetti and try to make a nice smooth curve. Okay? Once you've done so, I will want you to bring this to me the best that you can. I'd like to collect your spaghetti sine curve. And then there will also be a form on the website right below the link you clicked on to see this video where I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of follow-up questions, okay? Definitely seek me out if you need help with this. Like we mentioned in class Wednesday morning, you can come do this in person in my room 219 Thursday after school or next Tuesday if you want to. And if that's what you're going to choose to do, you can use my spaghetti and my glue and all those things. And generally, just ask for help if you need it, guys. I appreciate the effort you're about to put in. Thanks for doing something a little bit fun today. And I will see you guys really soon. Have a great day, Warriors.